Greetings, salutations, and words of goodwill. Welcome back. This week I'm relatively busy, and since Thursday was a holy day of obligation, that cuts out the amount of time that I'm able to work. So even though I've been working on this series of videos on early Christian heresies, I won't be moving forward with that this week because the next one to cover is Arianism, and needless to say, for those of you who are even vaguely familiar with it, that requires a significant amount of effort and time to cover, which I just don't have. But I was teaching my son Latin earlier last week, and we were going over some vocabulary words, and something occurred to me which, I find interesting, so I thought I'd just go ahead and make a video about it. And that is the connection between the forms of relative pronouns, specifically the starting sounds in relative pronouns in Romance languages, and those in English itself. Now, for those of you who don't know what a relative pronoun is, in English it's essentially words like who and which. Although the relative pronoun is related to other words that start with WH, for example, when, why, and where in English as well. It may not be obvious how that would be the case, but for example, where is formed from a much earlier locative case of the word who in the languages which preceded English. And since the locative case shows you location, where is actually just the word who with reference to location. Which place, right? The where. And so, anyway, for those of you who speak Romance languages, what you may have noticed is that while these words tend to start with WH in English, in those languages they tend to start with QU. So, for example, in French you have qui, que, and laquelle, and in Spanish you have que, quien, quienes, cual, cuales, all the forms of cuyo, and then cuando. And then, of course, because it was Latin that originated this thought in my mind, in Latin you have qui, que, quod, cuius, 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 qui, quem, quam, quod, quo, qua, quod, qui, que, quorum, quorum, quibus, quibus, quos, quas, que, and then, of course, quibus again, and in the interrogative, the forms quis and quid, not to mention other forms like quando, which is also formed from this. Now, what I've said up to this point shouldn't be all that surprising, right? Different forms of the relative pronoun in English look similar, and different forms of the relative pronoun in Romance languages look similar in Romance languages. But then you start to notice something. For example, the Latin word for what is quod, and the Latin word for whom is quem, or quam if it's a woman, and the Latin word for when is quando, just as it is in Spanish, I might add. And if you know anything about the way that languages change over time, or from one place to the next, the first thing you'll notice is that vowels don't really matter. E's and I's generally tend to stay together, and A's, O's, and U's generally tend to stay together, but for the most part, vowels fluctuate significantly. In fact, when you're listening to someone with a different accent, primarily what you're hearing is that they don't say the same vowels that you do, right? They're speaking the same consonants with different sounds in the middle. And that's what makes them sound funny and why it's difficult to understand them occasionally, because they're actually not saying the same words that you're saying. They just have virtually identical grammar formations and spellings. And so if you take that into consideration, what you'll notice is that in all three of these instances, the words are essentially identical. The D and the T switching places in quid and what, but that's also relatively normal. Consider the word water for a second, which is spelt always with a T, but almost always pronounced with a D. But otherwise, the final consonants are the same, and what you have in Latin is a QU replacing the WH, or you might say in English, a WH replacing the QU. And you might say, hey, that's an amazing trick to help me remember my vocabulary. But there's a deeper question, which is, why are there these words which mean the same thing, look so similar when you're looking at them on a page, even if they don't sound very similar? And the answer is that they were the same word at one point. Both Latin and English come out of a much more ancient language called Proto-Indo-European, which no one alive has ever heard spoken for real, but which we can deduce the existence of from the significant number of similarities between English and Latin and many other languages in and around India and Europe, thus Indo-European. And so how did it happen over time that one sound in Proto-Indo-European became QU in the Romance languages and WH in English? Well, to understand this, the first thing you need to realize is that in English and in Latin, although this is less true in French and Spanish, when U follows a Q, it is not actually a vowel. It's a consonant. See, we get taught in school that Q makes the qu noise, but that's not actually true. QU makes the qu noise. Q makes the k noise, as you can see in words like Quran when it's spelt with a Q. So what causes QU to make the qu noise? Well, it's that the U in QU makes the w noise. The Q makes the k noise, and the U makes the w noise. And when you put those two together, you get qu. And w is not a vowel sound, it's a consonant sound. In fact, it's a consonant sound we usually associate with the letter W. And that should be your first hint as to why these two sets of consonants are related, the QU and the WH. And I'll add, this is the reason why you see so many C's in the forms in Latin and Spanish, because C also makes the K noise. And this actually shouldn't be that surprising, because the consonant V and the vowel U in Latin for the longest time were a single character. And when it was used as a consonant, it didn't make the V noise, it made the W noise, like in Wale and Weni Weedy Weeki, as Caesar would have actually said it. So this explains why there's a W in the English sets of words and a U in most of the Romance sets of words. However, it does not explain why the Q seems to have dropped out in the English words and why there's a silent H at the beginning of these words in English, which probably baffles most people. And to understand that, what you have to know is that the H was not originally silent, and also that the H was not originally second. If you look at what we call Old English or Anglo-Saxon, and no, I don't mean Elizabethan English or even Chaucer, I mean Beowulf level English, the language in which the angel said to St. Caedmon, "Caedmon, sing me Huatrugu," and to which Caedmon replied, ne conish not singon." In that language, the H came before the W, and the word what was pronounced what. And yes, it was said that violently, at least at the beginning of stories, where it took the place of what we currently use as once upon a time. And while the letters that we currently have in English don't make this obvious, there are actually a number of sounds in a number of languages that are sort of, as it were, halfway between the h and the k. This is demonstrated by the fact that Hebrew has two letters for it, the first one being chet and the other one being ayin, a letter which makes a sound that most modern speakers of Hebrew have completely abandoned, but which I'm told originally sounded like a camel hawking a loogie. Now, why do I bring that up? Because not only is there a sound between H and K, but there are a large number of sounds between H and K. However, what those sounds do is connect H and K linguistically or etymologically, such that a K can become an H, and an H can become a K. The same way we saw earlier the D and the T switching places. And indeed, it seems that this is the case, that this is actually what happened, because the root that etymologists give for the reflexive pronoun in Proto-Indo-European is some form of the sound quo, usually spelt unsurprisingly with a K and a W. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting and that it might spark your capacity to start to see these connections in other English words amongst themselves, and then English words with words in other languages, because it doesn't just help you to build a vocabulary and remember what the words mean, or even figure them out by looking at them and going, oh, that's very similar to the English word whatever, and therefore I know that that's what that means. But it also helps you to understand how it is that languages are formed, and in so doing, you better understand how they function and can understand not only how to use them better, but also, in a sense, what you're doing when you're using them. And in so far as you're capable of that, understanding what you are as an entity that speaks. Anyway, please like, subscribe, comment below, and thank you. And until next time, God bless and have a great day.